hierarchs, fathers, professors, fathers, distinguished audience. I'd like to thank the organising committee for the invitation bestowed on me in order to speak in this very topical conference, and I'd like to, in fact, talk about the matter that has already been mentioned. In the era of the woke culture, as an expression of the deconstruction of every stereotype, every value, culture and tradition, we see the tradition from the individual of interest to the individual of desire as a motive for an absolute version of the concept of human autonomy and the excess which manifests itself as Rightsism, which leads to a totalitarianism and a promiscuity due to a wrong understanding and application of the so-called human rights, which are considered to be exclusively individual and absolute. In this perspective, the concept of right is understood as an exaggerated and abusive right. A typical example of such a false understanding of the right as an individual is the birth of a child, an event which, in the perspective of a rights-based thinking, is seen as an event of satisfaction and fulfillment of a desire, and is not perceived as the result of an interpersonal relationship of society and life between the parents and spouses. They see also abortion in a similar way, as the satisfaction of the right exclusive to a woman, other than the concept of motherhood as a relationship. Thus, the human right in the perspective of Rightsism is alienated, as it is motivated by desire and driven by individualism, elements which project it as an unbridled expression of totalitarianism. In tracing the relationship between human rights and Rightsism under its anthropological approach, we beg the question of the identity of man. John Chrysostom answers to the question, what is man? He who lives by himself, alone, is superfluous to all things, and is neither a man nor a part of our race. Rejecting the individualistic view of man, which defines man as someone alone, that is not with others. The above patristic definition also confirms that the right of every man is born and operates when man belongs and lives communally. Rights exist to delimit relationships. They do not erect walls and barriers between people. Rights must not produce isolationism. Society is not composed of conflicting collectivities or individualities because it thrives on the basis of its universal and collective consciousness and the intrinsic value of a common life. Consequently, the true human rights defender selflessly defends the rights of others within the community and not selfishly, exclusively and absolutely, not selfishly, exclusively and absolutely his own rights. This is emphasized in the psalm, "Teach me thy rights, the rights of others, and not my own rights." In patristic thought, the question is directly related to the concept of communion as a continuous relation to everything that is outside of oneself, which is why man, according to Maximus the Confessor, is also defined by his relationship to God, his environment, and his fellow human beings. It is important that this patristic reference is also confirmed by modern scientific theories of physics and cosmology, especially by the so-called cosmologic anthropic principle, according to which man is not determined alone but in relation to the world, just as the world is determined in relation to man. Moreover, man is not considered as being exclusively alone, but only when he's in a relationship of development and creation to his environment. This approach has already been analysed by Basil the Great in his work, as well as by Gregory Nysis in On the Construction of Man, where the biblical starting point is the passages, "And God said, let us make man in the image of the Son and after his likeness, and let us begin from the fish of the sea and the fowls of the air, and the beasts and every creeping thing. And God made man in the image of God, and made him in the likeness of God. Male and female he made them, and God blessed them, saying, go forth and multiply and replenish the earth. The Lord God took the man whom he had begotten and set him in the garden." This relationship is also characterized as a continuous movement in which man both lives and does not cease, according to Gregory the Theologian. So this continuous relationship or relational state of man as the essential characteristic of his existence and as a continuous communion enables man to understand that he does not exist as something isolated, but something that is the centre and the sine qua non relation of community and existence. From all of the above, it is proven that the Church Fathers, although they did not speak directly about the concept of right, nevertheless described the way in which every right can find fulfillment, approaching the question from the perspective of the relationship of existence. In particular, the relationship of the relation of communion of man as a person with God, his environment and his fellow man proves that any version of a right in the perspective of an exclusively individual-centered utilitarianism constitutes the alienation of man's real identity. In this relation of society, even freedom as a human right is not established as a claim, but as an achievement through a network of relations where a continuous self-transgression is achieved as a continuous movement towards the other. The anthropological perspective implies that the right with right reference to the fellow human being is an ideology and is destructive for society itself. Freedom without reference to the other can become impunity, but we who are strong ought to bear the infirmities of the weak and not to like ourselves, each one of us to please his neighbour in the good work of edification, because in the fathers of the Church, freedom is understood as an affirmation and acceptance of the achievement as an achievement through which respect and acceptance of the fellow man is expressed, and not the procedure of satisfying exclusively and in a utilitarian fashion individual rights alone. In this way, freedom shapes the relationship of society and leads neither to individualism nor to isolationism, nor to self-determination, since the right, when it operates within the limits of individual autonomy, also expresses the power of self-determination. Thus, is there an individual right, according to what the Fathers have said about man and life? The negative answer is not so self-evidently accepted, but even the affirmation cannot be transcended. Any social conception of human rights as an individual right, exclusively and only, is, in essence, the armouring of the instinctive demands of an individual assurance, desire for pleasure, or claim against any collective coexistence from which it is believed that the life of each individual is endangered, as are his utilitarian claims. Well, society appears simply as an external framework for the fulfillment of each individual. This is exactly the content of the terms individual rights and individual freedoms in the first article of the Universal Declaration. And with the same content, they also are used in legal terminology and science, which is why they create several problems, especially with regard to their interpretation and application. It is in this context that any reaction of the Church to any state legislation through which the satisfaction of any form of individual desire is served, which acts in the absence of common life, and for the satisfaction of the interest in individualism of every rightsist or proponent of such a rightsism. This is achieved today because in the name of rightsism, existential and interpersonal relations between people are abolished, and every right is, in fact, something that leads to our determination from others. So, if we are going to be determining things in this manner, we will no longer have a community with sense. Finally, it turns out that the right must serve distinction and not division, and contribute to unity and not to division. But how do we understand the right in relation to freedom? The answer presupposes two axiomatic principles. Freedom is not limited to the confines of individual autonomy, but is offered to the other. And the right of freedom is not limited to the confines of individual sufficiency, self-sufficiency. But what do these axiomatic principles constitute as regards the right and its functionality? The certainty that the highest expression of human freedom is achieved only when man freely sacrifices even his individual rights, motivated by the consolidation of society and not by his utilitarian self-gratification. That is when the duty of man exceeds in power the simple horizon of human rights and individual freedoms, when the right of freedom is evaluated on another level, the level of life, and individual freedom becomes personal freedom. The right, therefore, must express acceptance of otherness, and this is achieved when the self-determination of the subject is realized and manifested through acts of exclusive relationship. Then we must say that this is done through a monastery, the community of the monastery, and a family. Then only human rights are really and essentially related to the good of freedom. There remains, however, the topical question as to the concept of individual rights and the right to freedom, as to the way in which the rights of others can be defined, especially when these rights are considered as rights of self-determination and not determination by others. By way of example, the wish that's of somebody when they die to be cremated, euthanasia, organ donation, suicide, abortion. Topical issues which also touch the boundaries of human identity and human existence and life. In this regard, I believe that the Orthodox Church and theology, without underestimating the legal significance and social dimension of the whole problematic of the concept of the right, should inspire the legal world, aiming at replacing the individualistic view of man with a genuine person-centered approach, thus contributing to the development of a new legal culture, which will respect the human person, which must be preserved, and the right of the human person as a right deriving from relationship. This is only achieved when the anthropological affirmation of the right is a priority of life and freedom to prioritize the needs of our own life and existence. The second element of rightism, as I mentioned at the beginning of my introduction, is the identification of the right with desire, with the way in which freedom and the will are used, an element that is distinctive in man and differentiates him from animals. In the animal, desire is determined by instinct, or it is the same as instinct. In man, desire is determined by the use of freedom. which is why freedom is a defining element of human nature and of man's identity. No animal can resist the inherent rationality of its nature. Man can do so because his peculiar features is freedom. Characteristic, finally, is the abusive exercise of the right in relation to the concept of individual desire. I think that the answer is given by the constitutional guarantee of rights. What is mentioned in the Constitution as regulatory indicates the value of human being as a basis for the acceptance and recognition of human rights. In the Greek Constitution, we see everyone has the right to freely develop his personality and to participate in the social, economic, and political life of the country, of Greece, that is, as long as he does not violate the rights of others, finally confirming that the criterion for the exercise of the right is respect for the right of others and not just in the fulfillment of our personal freedom. Freedom, therefore, as an exercise of the right, is not limited to the limits, to the boundaries and confines of individual self-determination, but is valued when it functions as openness and the desire to offer to the others. Any concept of extreme rightism cannot therefore be understood or approached as an application of the human right to fulfill individualism, self-interest and desire. Moreover, any autonomous view of human rights, exclusively and collectively as individual rights, implies both the degradation of its functional value and the reduction of its social acceptance and referentiality. Thank you.